Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator. So happy to be joined this afternoon by Lofty Whitaker, who is Regional Sales Manager East with Audix. Thank you so much, Lofty, for taking some time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Glad to have you guys aboard.
So let's get right into it because there's a lot to chat about. I want to talk a little bit about conference rooms. I also want to talk a little bit about classrooms and miking in those respective environments. Let's start with conference rooms and other enterprise spaces, if that's okay with you. What would you say are some key considerations to take into account when you're planning miking in those kinds of environments specifically?
Well, there's a few things to take into account. Obviously, the room size and the acoustics are very important. But much though it pains me to say this as an audio guy, the aesthetics are actually very important in those kind of enterprise situations and basically in any kind of conference room. Let me just show you the room we're in at the moment. And this is a very typical kind of conference room. When you come down to aesthetics, a lot of times people don't want to see microphones on the table. There's fair few reasons for that, but mostly what people are looking for is something that's based off the ceiling. So having a good idea of what you've got to offer the customer and how it's going to look at the end of the day in those situations is obviously a very important part of the whole consideration. So you need microphones that are going to work and work effectively, but you also want to have microphones that are going to not get in the way. People these days generally don't want to see tech. Although we rely on it every day in our lives, people don't necessarily want to see it. So the aesthetics is definitely very important, and being as we're Department 27, a lot of times everything that you're faced with is already a fait accompli. So usually the microphones have to work around what's already in place at that point.
Right, right. And I certainly agree with you. Certainly aesthetics are a very high priority in many enterprise spaces these days. So before we turn our attention to classrooms and education environments, I just want to plumb a little bit deeper, if I could, into those conference spaces. Are there particular, feature sets or microphone styles or any particular units that you think would serve corporate and enterprise clients especially well that, other than talking about, for example, the aesthetics, as you say, just kind of plumbing the depths and saying these kinds of mics, these features, this is what we need?
Yeah, certainly. Let me, if you don't mind, share a little UCI viewer. So, for example, in a lot of these rooms, there's several things to look at. First one is ceiling height. And essentially, if you have a drop tile ceiling between 8 to 10 feet above finished floor, you can afford to go with a flush mount microphone like the M70, and that really does, bear with me while I spit it out, that really does fit the aesthetic for you. At 3 inches in diameter, flush mount to the ceiling, that ticks the box for the invisible microphone. Now, this is where some of the other considerations come into play here. So, if you have a ceiling that's more than 10 feet above finished floor, you're probably going to want to consider a pendant style microphone, such as the M3, which we're listening to right now. That's a tri-element microphone. And as such has a wider pickup area than a single element microphone, for example, or an M55, which is another pendant style mic with a single element to it. These will help you out if you have ceilings up to 16 feet above finished floor. And that's a very important consideration to get into to come to in these situations, because essentially the laws of physics say you want to have that microphone as close as you possibly can to the person that you're trying to pick up. And with a 4-foot or a 6-foot drop on these mics, for example, that's going to get the microphones down to a consistent height for you.
Very, very informative, Lofty, and I appreciate that. So let's just quickly shift gears before we close out the conversation to talk a little bit about classrooms and education spaces. Obviously, you know, best practices might be similar across these different environments, but the actual specifics, the actual nuts and bolts of effectuating the kind of miking outcomes we want are probably quite different. So if you think about an education space or a classroom environment, what are some of the considerations to bear in mind, and what are some of the mic options that might best suit it?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's do this. If you guys will follow me through, we'll go through to our classroom next door, and we'll take a look at some of the solutions for that.
Sounds good.
So now what I've switched to is I have 5 of our M70 flush mount mics operating in the room. And simply by taking the elements out of the center of the room, where they're all grouped together with an M3, now I can move around the room freely and be picked up wherever I walk around to. So positioning your microphones is going to be something quite important for you in these kind of situations. And knowing where you can put them is going to be another consideration for you. Is it a hard mount ceiling? Is it a drop tile? And for directionality's sake, we have a microphone called the M45, which is a modified shotgun. It's on a swivel pivot arrangement, and in the ceiling, this allows you, rather than to have the microphone element pointing straight down into the room, this allows you to have the microphone element pointed in towards the room. And if you're picking up students for student capture, for example, certainly you're going to want to have something that's going to be picking up on roughly the same plane that the human voice comes out. So the human voice doesn't come out of the top of our heads. Think of it as a 90-degree conical horn. And as such, the best way to pick that up is going to be in the same lateral direction. And obviously you don't want a forest of microphones on the ceiling, so something with a lot of sensitivity and a good depth of field for pickup is going to be a great choice for you. So let's say I'm the diligent student sitting at the front. I want my microphone to be picking me up effectively here. And without adding any more microphones, there's just 3 M45s in this room, for example. By depth of field, I mean that I'm also being picked up effectively back here in the slightly less diligent student's position. And I can also be the very undiligent student, came in late, standing at the back after football practice and leaning over and whispering to my buddies, like to make sure that they've got notes for me from what I missed. And of course, if you have a microphone that's capable of picking up and whispering at the back, that serves a couple of purposes. A, the person that came in late busted, and B, the very quiet spoken person. And this is certainly a consideration for people. I'm sure many people listening to this video have had this situation where they commissioned a room and it sounds great, they sign off on it, but then they get a complaint from the end user, and try as you might end up going back in there and not being able to find anything wrong. That person may be the soft-spoken person. That person may be the person that doesn't have a booming, projecting voice. And at that point, your noise floor becomes very important, because if that person is speaking just above the level of the noise floor of the room, for example, that creates challenges for you trying to pick that person up and still have your gating auto mixer opening the gate at the right time and not chopping them off. So picking a microphone that's going to have a low noise floor, high sensitivity, very, very, very important indeed.
Well, this has been very, very informative and educational, Lofty. I think our readers will very much have a better idea now when they're approaching enterprise and conference spaces, as well as when they're approaching education spaces, on some ways to effectuate the kind of outcomes that our clients and our audience expects. So thank you so much for those insights. Really, really informative.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I would try and encourage people to do is before you're designing a room, try and get a listen to the microphones that you're putting in there. Let's let's all have a listen to them. We're all people that put microphones into these spaces all the time. Let's have a good listen to them before we actually put them in somewhere. How about that?
Words of wisdom. Yes, I second that. Thank you again, Lofty Whitaker, who is Regional Sales Manager East with Audix, for taking the time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator, and please check back on commercialintegrator.com regularly for more great and informative content to serve the commercial integration channel just like this. Have a great day.